I'm Gemma and this is a chat with Gemma. It's been quite dull today and so I've got my little light on even though I'm doing this in the daytime. And it's one of those days where you kind of get up and think, gee, it's very still because we usually have wind for one thing, and there's usually some noise around me because it's a little cul-de-sac where I live. But when it's like this and it's raining and people not, outside talking or mowing their lawns, it can kind of seem like you're the only person in the world. And you can feel a bit lonely, a bit depressed if you're that way inclined, which as I've said, am. But I've been down the street for a cappuccino, so I'm okay. But yeah, I was playing the piano before, and I thought, did somebody just photograph me with a flash through the window? And then, boom! And I was, as I said, I nearly couldn't play the piano. It nearly jumped off the chair. It was like one of those times when the thunder is straight after the lightning. And then we had like another one, but it was further apart, and then it's completely stopped. But apart from that, it's just very still. So yeah, it's kind of funny when it's like that. Anyway, so today I wanted to talk about the youngest child in a family. Now, it doesn't always have to be the youngest child. It might be the middle child, or it might be, other people can have similar feelings. But I remember once I was down the street and I bumped into, well, let's call him a relative, but he's not a relative by blood. And he had his little daughter with him. And I was like, how are you, blah, 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 blah. And he said something about, I didn't want another child. And like she's there holding your hand. She's of an age where she can understand what you're saying. And I just thought, what do I do here, What do you say? What do you do? Like for her sake. Anyway, I can't really remember what happened. And I know it's nothing to do with the story, but she's a very pretty child. Maybe I said something to that effect, I don't know. But you just sort of wonder what effect that has then going through that person's life. Now look, we do make a lot of fuss these days about things that somebody said when we were children and hanging with us forever, and I do think too much fuss is made. We do have to sort of have some sort of thickness to our skins, I think. But yeah, my mother used to sort of throw a lot of barbs my way, and little darts, little insults, and sometimes some quite big insults, and they did accumulate. And I'm not the youngest, and it got to the point where it was like a knife in my heart every time, figuratively speaking, of course. And I know that then I react maybe just on 2 occasions quite badly in the workplace when something kind of similar came my way. You know how when you're in the workplace and somebody can kind of accuse you of doing something that you didn't do, or maybe they insult the way you did something even though you'd been very careful to get it perfectly correct. And you're like, and whatever, whatever your particular scenario is, fits into that. So excuse me if I don't name, something that happened to you. But you get the picture. These things can accumulate, and they can be a little pile in the end, to the point where you do sort of feel like rejected in some way, or like you were not meant to be born, or you're not wanted, something like that. So can you imagine being the fourth child and, oh, they wanted one and they wanted two and they wanted three. They didn't want you, or one of your parents did not. The mother definitely did want, she would have had, I think, 5 children. But, you know, your father didn't want you. That's something to get your head around and your emotions around, I think. And I love listening to, I've mentioned it before, listening to Jim Gaffigan, the comedian, and he's not paying me to say that. I'm just mentioning it. But he, look, you know, I really like listening to him and he's very funny. But he does mention a lot. We've got too many children. So they've got 5 children and they're Catholic. So, you know, I think what he's doing is deflecting that sort of stereotypical criticism that probably people are going to think and say because they've got too many children by modern standards. It would be a small family in the old days, of course. But I do kind of cringe when he says that because, you know, obviously that's in a public forum, he's on a stage, it's going to get back to those children one day if it hasn't already. And they're going to think, well, is it me that's too many? You know, is it me? I'm the 5th one. Am I too many? I'm the 4th one. Are I and the 5th one too many? You know, which ones are too many? Which one gets pointed at as being the one that's too many? And I think that's something he shouldn't say. Just, if people are going to criticise you for having too many children, just let them do it, but don't say things like that. Jim, if you're listening, which I'm pretty sure you are, not really. You know, we do have to be, if you're a parent, you have got to be very careful about saying things like that. And all right, as I say, you know, you're going to trip over your words sometime. You can't be too self-flagellating about it. But it's just a thought to be careful of giving that impression sometimes. It's not even words. You can give it more loudly, perhaps, than words in the way that you perhaps treat that child. And a lot of families are going to say, oh, the poor youngest, you know, get all the presents from the older children and now the parents have got more money and my youngest is spoilt rotten and yeah, that can happen, and they get away with murder, and that obviously the parents are tired by then, so the expectations are not there on them behaving a certain way and all of that. Yes, but what if you are that person and you just do feel that probably I shouldn't have been born, I'm too many, and things like that then carry forward into your school life, your uni life, your work life, or whatever it is, or even now having your own family where, you know, even your own children can criticise you sometimes, and that little wound in the heart can get reopened by your own children, that sort of thing. So, yeah, and in quite big families, the youngest one was still at home with ageing parents, and the older ones are all one by one leaving the nest, and there's a feeling of loneliness often that the youngest one can have. Some of them are like, yeah, they've all gone. I've got the place to myself now, and my parents are putty in my hands. But it's not always that way. Sometimes the youngest can get quite a bit of anxiety and loneliness and depression, things like that, from just that. You know, people, they keep leaving me. Somebody outside's got a loud motor. I don't know whether you can hear that. But yeah, they can get this feeling of being gradually deserted. Will I be all by myself here one day? And literally that can happen. Some people do, particularly when there's not a high income, can wind up being in their parents' house all alone and suffering from loneliness and depression and all of that. So, yeah, so it is worth, you know, talking about this, thinking about it, recognising it. because when I did get to a point of thinking about my own situation, and I kind of got emotional there and reacted quite extremely, or maybe a little bit extremely for the situation. And when I recognised that, I thought, yeah, I don't need to do that because that's not what's happening now. That person's not. It's not my mother doing that again to me. And you can kind of analyse it from the point of view of, gee, that person's behaving pretty badly, doing that to me or saying that to me. Interesting that that person's behaving badly, but I don't have to take it inwardly. I don't have to feel that, kind of adrenaline rush to my chest. I can just be kind of free of that and water off a duck's back, let that go away. In fact, one person that I worked with came to me one day and said, let's call him Keith. Keith said he had a go at you and said XYZ, and you just didn't react. And he was like, oh, what's going on there, Have I offended her so much? And it was just that I kind of thought, no, I'm not going to honour that remark, I'm not going to give a voice to it, like take out of my brain a little microphone and put it in front of that person's mouth and then, bring that into my brain. I'm not going to do that. And so he kind of, I think, must have felt like he was left looking a bit silly. Too bad, so sad, for doing that. Well, maybe that might make him think twice next time. And so you might get that. You might get where people are kind of, a bit disgruntled that they didn't get a rise out of you. Well, that's their problem. They have to deal with that. Don't worry about them. They're not really behaving well. They don't deserve for you to worry about them. Yeah, just worry about yourself. I'm not letting that go inwards. Saves a lot of suffering. All right, I hope you're well. Hope you're not lonely today. And may God bless you. Bye for now.